Well,
Okay.
better for seeing you. You haven't been here for a while.
I know. I know.
Look at you and your green thumb. Look at your wonderful
It's not
calf
mine.
waiting. Is that a Boston fern?
I don't really know if its origins are Boston or somewhere
Right.
else, but
I've never heard of a Boston fern. That actually is never.
Oh, a
Hey,
Boston
Steve,
fern.
Steve, I just want to ask you to pass some congratulations on to one of your employees, Joyce Manchester. I sent her a document to review, and I got back in almost instantaneously an extremely professional and very well thought out document that was helpful. And the speed with which she did it, I think, was very impressive.
okay, great. Thank you. You should let her know. She's very good and she's very thorough and cares a lot about this. So,
I did send her a note.
okay, good. Thanks.
Okay, so we are live. We're about to embark upon our first discussion of the American Rescue Program or Plan. What is it? Is it program or plan?
I think it's really sort of a strange title, American Rescue Plan Act. And so,
Yeah.
That's it. ARPA is getting named these days.
So I think all of us share the concern that how hard it is to keep up with what the feds are doing and what kind of input the legislature can have on certain programs that are developed with this money. And I think Senator Kitchell has been good in asking for our input. They accepted the changes we made to the that $10 million appropriation that I guess is on the calendar today. And we wrote in there, you'll remember the last paragraph was something that along the lines that the administration should consult and collaborate as they develop the plan through our legislative council and joint fiscal office. So we are not totally, I can't imagine it working seamlessly, but so we are in the loop and it's just not dropped on us. And then we have a certain amount of days to deal with it, or we're told if you don't deal with it now, people won't get their money for 3 months. So we're not in the normal legislative process. So I thought it would be good, and other people have suggested that we start learning about this and getting out ahead of the curve. So I want to be clear, the administration has the right to sort of box us out, but we have the right to push back and say we want information. Last time around, I don't know if any of you recall, Senator Brock probably recalls, we were asked by the pro tem to develop a plan on how to help small business. And, the first thing I did was call the administration and said, what are you doing? And they had like these teams, like blue ribbon teams of 6 or 7 people working on this. And I asked, can we be part of those and sit in on those? They basically said no. And the auditor had the same experience. So the more education we have on this kind of stuff, the better prepared we'll be. We know is coming down. So it's in some ways a good problem to have, because I understand there's a lot of money. So with that introduction, Steve, why don't you give us an overview?
Sure. So I don't know how your committee works. I sent you all a copy of sort of my talking points. And do you like to post it too, or what do you want to do with this? Should I not post it, but should I put it on the screen, or do you want to just work on?
If you can put it on the screen, that would be great.
Okay, well, that's challenging my abilities, but I will do it. Let's see. So I need to get the share screen going. And then hold on. Let's see.
So,
No, I can.
But
Oh, you want to do it either way? I can do it.
all of us or Nathan has it for the website.
I just have to. No, I can do that. I've actually been taught because I need to learn how to share screen. So anyway, let me. Do I have changed share screen? I think I do. Okay. Yes. So now I can put this up here. And is it up there? Because I see you on the side, but is the document up there?
Yep.
Yes.
I have to get. That's weird. Okay, let me get rid of this. Okay, great. So I'm just gonna go through it, and then you need to stop me when there's questions. It's just, as you know, it's a lot of money. They use 2.7 billion. I think it's probably a little more than that. The key thing here is that there's a lot we don't know. It's changing daily. There's no regs. There's just, the money isn't going to arrive until mid-May. And it's a mix of things, and I'll talk about that. $1 billion goes directly to Vermonters. We're not going to have any impact of that on that at all. And it's the 30% increase in the EITC. The first 10,000 UI is not taxable federally, and this is something that's coming up in, I think the Senate Finance Committee has said maybe we should extend this to Vermont law too, but it will affect about an $11 million cost in FY21, the current year, if we make this deductible. But that's something that needs to be wrestled with. The child care tax credit's a big change to make the $250 to $300 monthly payments, because the tax credit's being raised, and it's also being able to be refundable, every month. So that could be it's getting a lot of attention, could lift a lot of families out of poverty or give them more resources. So aid to businesses, there's a lot of money for restaurants, and it's directly through the feds. Family leave credits through September 30th, paycheck protection, employee retention credits, and shuttered venue grants. The part that sort of drives me nuts is they gave $87 billion to support 185 failing multi-employer pension plans, but at the same time, it said the state cannot use its money for its pension plan. So I thought that was sort of mean, but anyway. $10.4 billion to support agriculture, supply chain, grants, training, and all that stuff, most of it is not in the state. And we'll talk about what's in the state in a minute. But so there's a lot of money going out for businesses, just not controlled by us. And this theme of not controlled by us is going to be, you're going to hear it in other ways. So then the other thing is, including the December funds, about 568 million are going to local government and schools. And this is where the state is just a pass through. So towns and municipalities are getting direct money. And you can see there's 19 million to Burlington, 57 million to towns, and 121 million, quote, to counties. Now, there's language that says if counties that if there are not counties, like in the case of Vermont, that money goes to municipalities or something of that nature. And we think it means that money goes to cities and towns. And I think that's what the Welch's group thinks. And again, there's no regulations. Other people are saying, "Ooh, can we put that money into regional planning or to CUDs or things like that?" And I think the answer is no, but it's not like ironclad. It's just, I've gone over the language several times and we're still going over the language. But I think that the safe bet is you just add it to the municipality's money.
And Steve, on some of these towns are called out individually.
Right. So the only one in Vermont. Oh yeah. So that's what I was going to. So the one in Vermont that gets its money directly is Burlington. It gets 19.080. Then we have a spreadsheet that says how much each town's getting, and I just put a couple up here for fun. Calais is getting 160,000, Orwell 120. You can see this Newport town, Royalton 280. And that's just out of the first two, the 19 and 57. If the 121 is given out also to towns, you can multiply those numbers by 2.5. So it's a lot of money. The only requirement is no town can get more than 75% of their budget. So this is a lot of money going to towns. And for the ones that are really small, that don't have much administrative structure, this is going to be a real issue because they're going to get a ton of money. You don't want to, you need to spend it in accordance with the regulations. You need to make sure that you're not building a long-term, while this is 4-year money or 3.5-year money, you don't want to build an obligation forever. And you want to make sure you're not violating any rules. We don't think you can use it for setting up a revolving fund. You can't use it for doing anything that goes beyond the 3.5 years. So that's a concern, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, because you'll talk about what it can be used for.
Yeah, and that'll come up in a minute too. Okay, so then schools are going to they got 27 million already. Last year we gave them about 70 million of CRF money. Plus they got 27 million from the direct ESSER 1, I think we called it. And so they got about $100 million. So this year, when we anticipated school spending, we said, oh, they'll grow at about, I think it was 2.7%. Well, they actually spending grew at 1.3%, a fraction of what we thought they grew at. And part of that is they had a lot of federal money and schools are in a uniquely different place. But if you think about that they got 100 million last year, and they are going to get 380 million this year, between the two sources, the 114 and the 257. And so that again is a lot of money to a lot of school districts, some of which are going to have no problem going through it. And some of them will have issues. And again, I'm going to talk about the technical assistance issue in a minute. What it does raise, though, is this whole question about traditionally what we do in the state level is take some of our capital money and give it to match towns, or to help them with water issues, or put in there a downtown tax credit, to help towns revitalize their downtown. Well, these towns are now sitting on more money than they've had in a long time. And so the question is just how much for at least a year or so, do we rethink, do we put our money there to do that? Or do we do other things? Do we use our money as a match to help steer where they're going? We have no control of what they do with their money, but we can create incentives to do what you want to do. So it's just something to think about as you're thinking about how you do that. And they're going to be bound by exactly the same rules we are. We're going to go over in the state, the federal money is coming to the state. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. So the Senate, in Senate 315, which you have on the floor today, the Appropriations Committee did two things to help with this. One is they provided some technical assistance capacity to municipalities and towns by putting $650,000 to the VLCT to hire two people to provide assistance for the next 2 years or 3 years to just offer towns help with guidance, regulations, things like that. And they provided $300,000 to the regional planning entities to do the same thing, to help them more on the project side, because regional planning agencies have been really critical for project management, and they can go to the town and say, okay, we can provide you some basic help on setting up a project. If you want more, the towns often pay the regional planning entities to help them. But we gave them sort of starter fuel to get the program up, to get it going. And so, in that bill, you'll see $950,000 to help out of the federal ARPA money to help municipalities, towns to manage and use this money. Now, the interesting thing is, and we'll come to this again, there's not really clear guidance that we can do that. There was no federal money to help towns use the money. And we're sort of taking a little bit of a broader leap on letting the state provide money to do that. And we'll come back to that issue. On the school side, same thing. Senate approach put language in giving UVM or another consultant, if the AODE wants to do it, $2.7 million to set up a consulting group to really help the schools use the money correctly, wisely, to help improve performance, to maintain the guidelines, not create long-term obligations. And again, it'll be more useful in some towns than others. The likely thing is that money will go to UVM, that UVM would put it in the Tammy Colby's got a center there to help towns, and that may be what happens, but there's some flexibility. But it would be something other than AOE that provides resources and technical assistance to schools. And so this is something you'll be talking about in H315 as it was amended by the Senate. So, and we'll come back to the purposes in a minute. The key thing with this is we're operating, I don't know if you probably haven't seen it yet, but we're operating in the pre-regulation, pre-guidance period. Like in the CRF, you probably remember, we got guidance all the way till November, and so it was pretty awful. The first guidance started coming about now, then all the way through the summer and into the fall, we were told new things you couldn't do with the money. We would expect, on the one hand, we'd expect the guidance coming out of the Biden administration to be a little quicker and a little more organized. But the problem is that the Biden administration doesn't yet have control over these the entities. And the general thinking among the sort of Washington insiders is it takes about 6 months to get control of a federal agency. Just putting on the new head of the agency, like there isn't the CMS director they picked out, but is not there yet. So this is going to be we may see the same type of thing where the guidance sort of rolls out over time. The good news is that we think the guidance will be more favorable than less. And but it's still, everything we do has got some risk to it. And, because we're sort of looking at it and saying, what can we do now that is less risky? And what can we do? Where do we take our risks and things like that? And we may have to put language in that says, In the event this is not found to be within the guidance, then we have to substitute other money, or we just don't do it. And so that's sort of an issue that's coming on. So now we get to what the money, timing, as you all know, CRF could be used, when we first got it, it could only be used for 6 months. This money is now through December 2024, 3.5 years. The school money is good through September 2023, which is 2 years and 4 months, 5 months, something like that. It's supposed to arrive sometime in May or June. And the way the big state money is arriving, some of it says 60 days. The state money says the governor needs to request it. And from the time the governor's request is received, only has to also say, I'm requesting the money and I'll follow the rules. And if he sends in a letter saying, I'll request the money and I follow the rules, and for all we know, there's a form. I don't really know what they're going to do in that, but then it's supposed to come to us within 60 days of receipt of that letter. So just that puts it sometime in end of May. The other thing is that we're in a really different phase of the pandemic right now. I mean, when we got the March money, the CRF money, we were like fighting fires, and it was all about just trying to get the economy to survive and make it now. And now we're in the sort of recovery phase. And the question is, how do we build for the future? And, that's going to be a theme that you're going to see in the appropriations and the committee process is using this money to build for the future. And just to flag it, we have, other than the state of Wyoming, which is number 1, we're number 2 in the amount of money we got. So it's just, we're way out there. I mean, this is not even close to the average state. I mean, because of the small state minimum. And so just to give you,
Sorry, Steve,
Yeah.
do you mean per capita?
per capita, correct.
Okay. I was just like,
Yeah.
I hope not.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep,
Yeah.
you're right. And then, so the unlike the CRF, which was 1.25 billion, just plain old money, and we divided it between purposes, things like this, we have a fair amount of money coming in different areas. Like the 1.052 billion is state relief. We've already talked about the local relief, close to 400 billion. 113 million came in capital funds. 152 plus the 200 we've already received is 352 for rental assistance, which is going to be critical because originally we thought, how do we ever use 352 million? Well, probably one of the biggest public policy issues that we're facing right now is the homeless. And it's right now we've been using a lot of hotels for the homeless. There are currently about 2,400 of them, including 400 kids. And some of those hotels are hotels that will be continued to be used. Some of them are going to be probably going back to tourism once the economy sort of improves. And so that's going to be an issue. The other issue is that we're currently spending $6 million a month on this thing. And if you do that, 72 million a year to house those people. And it used to be, before the pandemic, the homeless population was sort of in the 400, 500 range. So, because we've opened up, released, sort of made it much more accessible to people, made it much more, the housing in the hotels is much more available. So there's going to have to be a whole process of getting this, figuring out what to do in this area. The good news is it turns out, we think the rental money can be used for that purpose. So the fact that and what we think is right now, FEMA is covering this, but if the pandemic subsides to a certain level, FEMA won't be covering this. And we think about September, you may not get that money anymore. So the question is, how do we cover even if 6 million a month goes to 4 million a month, that's $48 million a year. It's not a sustainable situation, but to transition to anything is going to take a while. And so the good news is the renter assistance money can be used in that way. That can give us some resources to transition. One thing you'll see in the House 315 is some money to VHCB to sort of start funding homeless shelters where there's possibly buildings you can convert, because we're going to hotels are probably not the ideal solution for the long term. So this is a big concern. There's also
just on that, remember, we're the housing committee, so we're actually pretty clear on that. The question I would have here is, do you have any notion of whether we could use any of that for building permanent solutions to?
Okay, and we'll come to that in a minute. The answer is not really. We don't think we can, but there's one hope, and I'll raise that in a minute. So you also know we have 40 million in the mortgage relief money then, and you already sort of accessed that. Childcare got 47 million. And so these are all outside of the 1.052. So there's a lot of stuff going on. You've been pretty active in these other areas, and that's good. So now I'm going to talk about the uses, and I'll come back to this issue about how do we possibly put money into affordable housing, which is one of the two areas this is really not addressed. So the reuses are really to expand the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts. And there's a comma, including the assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and aid impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. Well, this is, the chair can probably have good fun with this, but I don't know what that comma means. If that comma means, well, it's really just everything before the comma. And then it gives you a really broad latitude on that money. If it says, if you interpret including to these things, and this is what you have to use the money for, then you really have a limited latitude in that money. So we're really in need of regulations. And I think what we're doing here is assuming more that the comma means something, that it's really the rest is just, oh, by the way, it includes these things. But it's a little risky. But this doesn't include, it doesn't include on the face of it, long-term housing. So this is not one where we feel, and so we're trying to sort of stay within we're sort of trying to walk a line, stay primarily within the this A language here, and make little forays outside of it that may or may not have to be drawn back. The second,
well, in other words, where there's clarity needed, if that sentence effectively said including but not limited to,
that would be wonderful.
That would be the ideal. And
Yes.
the question, of course, is whether or not we will get regulatory guidance that will clarify that.
Correct. And if you want to ask Washington for that, we're going to ask Washington for that. We're going to try to. I would love if you have friends in the congressional delegation, call them up and tell them to clarify that the right way, because that is such a huge deal for Vermont. And we'll come back to the affordable housing. There's one room there, but that's probably one of the biggest needs, and we would like to see that money being able to be used in that way. So, I'll explain how that's being addressed a little bit now, but first we'll go through this. The second one is really a takeoff on your hazard pay that you did last year. And they added this in the last minute to provide more money for hazard pay. But at the federal level, there's some language in this bill, and I haven't really become an expert on this at all, but that says you can pay as much as $13 an hour. And so in a lot of states, that's real good, $13 an hour. In Vermont, not so much. Our minimum wage has gone up quite a bit. So I don't know if that's going to be a big deal. You've sort of done the hazard pay, but that's something you can consider. It's not something that's being proposed at this time. So there. Then you get to the C is where there's this glimmer of hope for the provision of government services to the extent that the reduction in revenue of such state, territorial, or tribal government public health emergency relative to the revenues collected during the most recent full fiscal year of the state, territory, or tribal government prior to the emergency. So this is really a little convoluted, and this is another area for guidance. So the first thing is, what is the most recent full fiscal year prior to the pandemic? It's FY19. It ended in June of 19. And then, because during 20, we had pandemic, and 21, we had pandemic. So we read that as saying revenue loss since 2019, which is a little crazy, actually. But then the question is, in revenue loss, do they mean, so there are two ways to interpret it. One way is to say, okay, well, we look at the general fund down about 13 million from 19 or so, maybe the corporate and the transportation fund down a little bit, ed funds up because they've got more sales tax in the world. But that's not what it says. It says relative to revenues collected. Now, if I interpret that to be by revenue source, I all of a sudden have a great latitude. Like, let's say I know that the rooms and meals tax was down about 100 million, and the corporate tax was down a fair amount too. So if I can just say, well, I'll just ignore the fact that my sales tax went through the roof, and I'll ignore the income taxes way up, but we lost a ton of money in rooms and meals. So if I can just go source by source, this could provide 100 million plus. Now, I'm not sure that's what they intended. You know, that would be the most favorable interpretation for us, would be to allow us to look at every source of revenue we have, see which ones are down, and use this money for that. Now, if we can do that on a source basis, if we can't do it on a source basis, I can probably squeeze 20 million out of this. If we can do it on a source basis, I can squeeze maybe 100 million out of this. And this is one where I can't tell you we're really on the side of the angels, but it's a good idea to try it. And then this money is just says for the provision of government services. Well, one government service is affordable housing. So I think if we can get money here, we could use this for affordable housing. So this is sort of but again, this is not something we can do today because we really need some regulation guidance. This is our window. This is an area of opportunity. Then it says then it has this weird thing: to make necessary investments in water, sewer, or broadband infrastructure. You know, why those three? But that's what they did. They put, so we know we can do water, we know we can do sewer and broadband infrastructure. Those are like, so those things are like free, you know, go home and get out of jail free. You can do those, you know, but I wish they'd, you know, it'd be nice if they'd said, including, you know, those, or in addition to other major investments, but they didn't. And then they said, you know, you can't cut taxes. You can't use this money to cut taxes, which is being litigated right now. I think that some states want to do that, and they're really mad at the Biden administration or Congress for limiting their ability to do that.
Can I ask, Steve? I actually was really trying to follow the kind of economist guidance that led the addition of infrastructure funds. Did you hear a reason that they might, I mean, my sense was they didn't want it to include like sports arenas, you know, that if you just say all infrastructure, you could be doing kind of useless projects for the majority of people affected by the pandemic. So if I find any articles about why they said this, I think economists were doing something important when they limited
it. I think there's a mix. I think part of it is something was important. And then part of it was the nature of the political process in Washington. And, I sent some comments because the House language was better than the Senate language. And I sent some language to the senators about maybe you could try to, move it toward the House language in this area. And I got back, first email was sort of like a little cryptic and, go jump in the lake. But then I got this email saying, we have one moderate senator we need to make happy. And so I think that there's a lot of this is just the political trading that went on in that thing. Because you add, the next thing is it says no state or territory may use funds made available in the section for deposit in any pension fund. Well, that's, that's pretty mean if they're going to spend all that money on private systems. So what we're thinking about doing, or what's going on in the appropriations world, that is to save as much general fund as we can, and then to maybe reroute that general fund into pensions and housing. Because if we can find eligible uses for this money that are that would free up general fund, then we can. I think there's a really strong desire to fund housing and pensions, but we have to grow our own. We have to sort of make capacity by moving money around. So that's sort of the type of thinking that's going on there. Now, this exact language here is what the locals have to do. They have the same A, B, C, D, and restriction. They can't use their pension funds. So the interpretation of this language and the guidance becomes really important. Then you have this other money, fiscal recovery and critical capital project funds, 113 million to remain expended for making investments in carrying critical capital, work, education, health monitoring, remote options, and public health relating to the public health emergency. So that money is pretty, that's a pretty broad. I like that broadness, and there's some things that are being talked about that are using that money, and some of it is, and this is mainly in the House. The Senate really hasn't started this. Capital bills in the House, and I think the institutions committee bills are going to sort of deal with this. But we have, this is sort of not this committee's focus, but you're all going to be back next January, and we have no idea what that means. Does it mean that life will be like before the pandemic, where your committee rooms will be filled to the brim, and you'll be everybody will be like on top of each other. Or does it mean that people aren't going to be comfortable doing that? Are we going to need to have a revamping of space? Are we going to do things to protect the public in a better way? So part of it is going to be, and the same issue is true of the courts. When they come back in existence, you're going to probably see some focus in the House on reserving some money and there's a study out now that the Joint Legislative Management Committee put in to look at what should we do in legislature for not just for the medium term, back next January, but the long term, to make our building more, friendly to the public, more usable by legislators, and to meet this sort of post-pandemic space needs. But for the courts, the same thing. And so there is going to be some reservation of this money to meet the needs of the legislature and the courts in this area. There's other talk about, there'll be other things done too to try to reserve money for this. So the capital bill money is being played with, being thought about, with the notion that everybody is aware there's talk in Washington about a new infrastructure bill. And we don't know what that'll contain, but it could be overlapping and it could give us more capacity. So that's sort of the housing. I'm trying to think what I missed. I think I'm about to go into more detail, but I wanted to stop there for a second. I don't know if I answered the questions you've been asking. Should I just keep going, or are we close?
Well, just a general question, Steve. Clearly, some of this money is directed specifically toward broadband, or at least broadband is one of the applicable uses. Are you aware of other federal funding of significant size that addresses broadband that's already on the way or will likely be?
No, but I do think the infrastructure bill may put that in there. I think you're going to see, from what I've seen in the House, and this is not, the Senate hasn't really had a chance to go this route. The House is doing the budget. Broadband is a fairly huge commitment that they're thinking of taking. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. Well, the governor, I can say on yesterday, the House Technology Committee asked the Appropriations Committee for $200 million of this funds for broadband.
Okay.
I don't know if they'll get 200 million, but they may get a lot. And so the other thing you'll see is clean water. There may be a big investment in clean water. Those are safe. It's going to be, they may not be perfectly safe, but they're pretty safe. When it says you can invest in clean water and broadband, those are pretty protected. Now, the clean water money, what might happen is we give them 100 million in clean water, and then we maybe move the rooms and meals tax revenue that was going to clean water for 5 years back to the general fund to give us a little capacity to fund these other things. There may be some trading going on here, but there is this problem because we can't. The perception is in the House, and it may not be true in the Senate. They don't think they're going to be able to raise taxes this year, and so creating capacity for ongoing general fund spending is really tough. And so there are some needs out there, and the housing can be done maybe with one-time money, but part of it is just how do you navigate this? How do you sort of do it in a way that creates capacity? So then you get to the sort of next sheet, which is fairly intricate, which you can see the 105.2, the 197 million for local fiscal relief, and the 113 for capital projects is up on top. Then you start seeing, and you see the elementary and secondary school education down here, higher education relief. So when we're doing the state colleges, we're trying to maximize. A lot of this money went to students for scholarships. It's not available to the school, but we've also asked them to sort of use some of this money for rescuing the state colleges and UVM, meeting their needs. The money goes to every school, and so private schools, public schools, on the higher ed world. But it's still not much. And when you get down to it, it shrinks really quickly. Then there's, you start seeing preschool infants and toddlers. When you get to the childcare issue, you got the preschool, the infant toddler, and then you see $47 million coming in for childcare development block grant and childcare stabilization grant. So, when you have the childcare bill asking for a ton of money from that non-existent general fund pot, because there isn't any general fund on the ongoing basis, and you have 47 million of coming in on the federal side, maybe, and this is, I'm I'm overstepping my role here, so I'll just say, but it's something you think about. You know, do you maybe try to get through the federal money, use it widely first before you make commitments, so we don't really have resources for it? And these are the type of questions that are going to have to be dealt with by you all when you're dealing with the money. Another childcare thing here.
Looking at
Yeah.
the childcare issues,
Yeah.
these are grants that I assume will either establish programs or pay for ongoing folks who are involved in these programs. Is that correct?
Well, this is not ongoing money. This is only through December 2024.
Well, that's what I mean, though. But again, they will be paying salaries for people performing those services during the period of time that these funds are authorized for. Is that right?
Well, that's up to you all. I mean, that's up to the state to how they use that money. The only question is if you use that money for that purpose, and then 4 years from now, you create this cliff that you just.
Well,
have
that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and so I think that's part of what you need to think through. And to me, it's like if you're training people, offering them a chance to get more degrees, you're fixing up centers, creating anything that's not ongoing. That's easier. If you're creating ongoing need and funding, then you just have to think it through, because you're going to at some point have to pay for it. There's one thought about maybe we should use some of these dollars to. I hate the fact that this is all online, and so if Washington's listening, just tune out for a minute right now. But maybe what we do is we do fund some stuff that the state would otherwise do with this money now, and then take the general fund or the resource and put it in a reserve, and leave it there for 4 years, so that when the time comes, we can, where the cliffs start developing, we have some resources to help navigate those cliffs. Because this is we could see the schools having this problem in a big way. If they have this money, they don't have the expertise. They may go into union negotiations and create fairly major ongoing obligations. So this is one of the problems you guys you all have to think about.
So
how do you navigate this?
So Steve, you mentioned this used by 2024, and I don't see that on your chart. I see not specified grants to states, preschool, infants, and toddlers, but I don't see any education piece that says 2024.
No, the education pieces are 9/30/23, right?
Yeah. So,
and then the state fiscal relief, December 31st, 2024.
Sorry, the state. Okay. Got it. Yep, at the top.
And those are just, and we have dates for, you'll see the dates here are all over the place, like the child care stabilization through 9/30/2021. That's $29 million has to be used, and not much time, so
it has to be used or allocated.
Has to be, you're right, that's a good point. It has to be allocated.
Okay, so that's a big improvement over the CRF.
No, it's similar. I think we had to sign out the expense. You're right, because in that one you had to actually expend it. But you know what? I want to tell you that I'm not sure. The guidance isn't there. We don't know how it's going to be interpreted. I would hope you're right. I would hope that we could just allocate it and that they give us much longer to expend it. In education law, for example, there's language that says generally you have a year from the final date to use it. So that would go to 9/30/2024. But this is all about the type of stuff that regulations would help us figure out, or guidance.
And I just don't know enough about this world, but when it talks about a stabilization grant, does that mean stabilizing the current inadequate system, or does that talk about stabilizing a need and establishing greater capacity?
So these are all fair questions. I guess I would say I hadn't really seen until you pointed out this 9/30/2021. That's so close.
Yeah.
We need to figure out what I don't know what that's $29 million. That's going to be a big concern. And I don't really know. I don't have the answer for you.
Yeah, we're going to need that, obviously, given that childcare along with broadband are two of the biggest needs identified by the pandemic.
Yeah. And so this tells me, if I were thinking about this, I would be advising the House Human Services and committees to deal with the child care issue to focus on using that stabilization money right away. Because that if it really means 9/30/2021, we have basically the next 2 months to figure that out.
Right. I mean, that's really brutal.
Yeah.
And,
So that becomes the key thing. And so if I were, the childcare bill is a more longer term thing, but you have this is very, and I got to check that. It just makes me feel anxious. So I will look at that issue.
yeah, all of us.
Yeah. So then you see Head Start, low income energy assistance, 25 million. I don't know enough about that yet, whether that's going to be what normally that's like double what we get in a year, or that's more than what we get. That's like taking what we normally get in a year plus this. So, but I haven't seen whether the thinking is here's your money. And so don't expect another $20 million in January or November. So this is something we need to look at. It's but if it's extra, that's great. And then you see community-based child abuse prevention. These are small. This is 381 is 381,000, 202,000. And then you see congregate home delivery of meals, supportive services, a whole series of little things, mental health block grant. And a lot of these available to expended means no limit. 2025 gives us a lot of time to use it.
And not very much money.
Yeah,
I mean,
not much money, small potatoes.
Even mental health needs, it's just shocking to me how low that is.
Yeah. So these are the type of things that you're going to have to think through. They did put, that's $8 million for mental health. But you're right, it's not a lot. There's other, they're about to do in Washington. There's another thing that's going on right now is they're starting to build the FY22 budget, and because that's supposed to be passed by September 30th. We're starting to get, they reinstated, and this is actually, your committee might want to get involved in this. They've reinstated earmarks. And so the House and Senate are going to be asking for, our delegation is going to be asking for recommendations for earmarks. And they would, I was having a conversation, and some of that will be on the web. There'll be opportunities, but it might be something to talk to your congressional delegation about. What can we do in the area of housing? Vermont has this phenomenally tough affordable housing issue right now.
Yeah.
And, could you approach the congressional delegation about a request for an earmark for some fairly major funds for housing development? So,
Steve,
yeah.
while you're talking about housing, the housing money in this bill, is it similar? Is it rental assistance similar to the 200 million we got?
So the 152 is similar in that it's very income limited, and it is similar. It's the details you would have to talk to the very skilled advocacy community to help explain the differences of those two sources.
But it's just, as far as you know, it's just for rental assistance?
The 152 and the 200 is rental assistance money. Yeah.
But
But you have a longer period of time to spend this money, right?
You do. You have another year, and but I in my early conversations with them, although I think it's going to change now that I know we can use this money for the homeless problem. There was a real question of whether we could even spend it. It just.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Well,
and so that's an issue, and we've been getting some pushback in Vermont because there are a lot of urban areas around the country that are getting, this is a small state minimums, and there is a lot of areas that need this desperately, and they feel like, all the sort of issues about equity and you'll hear from the advocates. They're hearing concerns from their associates in other states about how legitimate this is a practice in this type of area.
Could you just briefly help me understand how to follow the dollars here? Under this law, you've gone through a couple of areas where there's appropriations specific to those areas.
Yeah.
Is there a prohibition about spending this money on that and relieving some of the general fund pressure on that program, or does the money have to be spent above and beyond the general fund?
So it depends on the program. And so what I actually didn't copy, this sheet is going to be posted. It's posted on our website. And if it isn't, that will be. Every line has its own maintenance of effort requirement. And so some of them are exactly what you said, that you can't, it has to be new spending, can't be existing spending. But But that doesn't mean we can't find ways to be creative about that.
Right.
It's because, every year there's some new spending. And so you can, if to the extent that there's new, and the maintenance effort may be written the average expenditure of the last 3 years. So we do try to be creative and use it to create, since one of the missions is to create general fund for things like housing and for pensions. We're looking at that issue. And you can look at it too. And and what I would say is any committee that looks at this, like, and I think Senator Clarkson's point about the child care stabilization grant being a critical thing to start working on right away. As they look at it, they'll start to uncover that and unpack that. And, I would, if we can, I have a feeling that it's a pretty strong maintenance effort, but if you can find a way to take that, cover any growth in those areas this year that the governor proposed out of general fund, and then book that general fund, that can give you the capacity to move beyond the 29, 30, 21 into more ongoing, have an ongoing resource or more flexibility.
And is there forgive me if I missed this, is there a pot of money and how much, which just says this goes to the state and they could spend it any way they want?
No, I mean, the closest you have is this 1.052, which that you can't spend any way you want. This is the really difference to CRF. Even CRF had some requirement, had to be connected to the pandemic, but there was not much. It had 3 requirements. Has to be connected to the pandemic, which this does too. Has to be spent in 6 months, basically by December 31st, 30th, 2020. And it could not be in a budget already. So that was pretty broad. This is not that way. This is much more dependent on how they interpret this ABC of the language here. So that's what I'm saying. It's really a case of the money that's specific, we need to go specifically and look at it. The money that's general isn't that general. We need to look at the how the regs get developed. And we're in a period now where it's really getting the congressional delegation to recognize the sort of needs of Vermont, making the regs as positive as we can for us, and giving us some flexibility.
So from what you're reading in the papers, the concept that states were fighting hard to get a certain amount of money that was totally flexible, and we did get state and local governments got money. That money that's coming to the state is not as flexible.
Yes, you're totally right.
Okay.
And that was part of the negotiation with, quote, the moderate senator who was representing sort of both sides of the issue here.
Right.
And there was a negotiation about, we need to get that vote became critical. There was a lot of people who said states don't need the money, and says, let's give money to things that we think they do need. And I think that's probably going back to Senator Ram's point, the water, sewer, broadband was things everybody could agree they needed. And then this other stuff, I actually think that I think that A is probably the more restrictive interpretation. If you were to just stop at the Senate level, I think that the Biden administration can make it a more looser interpretation if they're encouraged to do that. And this is why the whole way this is interpreted becomes critical.
Yeah.
So another broad question. I know with the CARES funding, the governor had wanted to involve, and the legislature did get involved in appropriating and spending that money. But I also understand that some executive branches around the country just thought they had total control over this money and could just spend it the way they wanted without even consulting the legislature. At least that's my understanding. Is this similar that, and then I want to get into the potential joint fiscal committee process here. Is this viewed as a grant that grants that come in during the legislative session, I think are more likely to be appropriated by the legislature, but grants that come in off season, then the joint fiscal committee becomes a mini legislature and makes all the decisions.
Well, actually, that's probably not a totally fair comment, but I'll
No.
Okay.
Go ahead. I just short.
Okay. So first of all, a lot of this money will come in through existing funding lines, and if it comes in through a block grant or thing like that, it just comes in, and so it becomes state resources, and we can still appropriate it as legislature. The what'll probably happen with, and some of the money where it's already being spent, as I said, in the House, they're probably going to spend money and they're going to say the governor may anticipate receipts and may spend the money in the following areas. And that means the legislature is taking an action to essentially approve the receipt of this money. What the Joint Fiscal Committee did last year, as I recall, on the CRF money, is they said we'll hold, I think it was 225 million for immediate needs that we had today, and the rest was going to be appropriated by the legislature. So to the extent that they accept the money, I think, and this being 3.5-year money, I would fully expect them to say it requires appropriation by the legislature in their acceptance agreement. And so that's one of the things that we're debating is do we need to, can we just do that, or do we just accept it all now in a bill that says this money when it comes in, even though we have, normally what happens, the law requires us to get a governor's recommendation to accept it and a proposal, and then Joint Fiscal says we'll accept it on the condition that it's appropriated. But do we find a way to short circuit it, saying any money in this relief is hereby accepted for appropriation? And so that's actually a good question. You know, it's I think the result would be the same, but the legislature may want to act quicker and just sort of say, hey, we're fine with it. It's coming in, let's accept it in a bill. And we just haven't gotten that far yet.
So this committee deals a lot with economic recovery grants for businesses. Is there anything specifically in here for that?
I would say the things that I would be most focused on are the rental assistance money, which you already know about and you have been, the mortgage assistance money, which you know and you have been.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that both appropriations committees are focused on is how do we get more money for housing? And, you know, how do we sort of create capacity? And I think just the importance of creating capacity for housing is critical. There will be a little bit of money for the restaurants. As I understand it, there's some money that comes to the state, not a lot.
Sorry, Steve, I've read that there's a lot going, is it going straight to restaurants? Or
right, it's going into a fund. It's going into a fund that's administered by SBA, and it's not coming through the state.
So it's not coming through the state, but we have, one of our most hammered sectors is our venues, our performing arts, and there's a lot of money. And Karen Middleman has reached out and would like to come and talk to us about this shuttered venue grants, because that will need to be appropriated. My understanding is that's coming through. We'll have to understand that more fully. But
I think a lot of this isn't, but I don't know the answer, and I don't want. You're getting me ahead of what my knowledge, which is
okay.
easy to do. I know very little
about it because I think it's going through the Vermont Humanities Council and the Arts Council.
Yep, and that may be the case. And I just you know more than I know.
Hardly
on that.
But so, the restaurant money is going to the SBA. Whoa.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But I just read that it was not coming here. I don't really know exactly how it's being distributed. And that's an area which we can look at over time. I mean, it's not on our list here. It's not. I looked at the source of money that I think Doug Hoffer had sent an email about some federal money that was coming in, and he raised it. And I looked at that funds, and that was definitely not coming to the state directly. So we can look at that, and I can send you the language that has to do with those funds.
So the only help for business in this bill is the restaurant money?
No. There is a ton of money for business, but it's not coming through the state. Well, we talked about that up front. You know, we talked about family leave credits, paycheck protection, again, employee retention, shuttered venue grants.
So those are all going to be administered by federal agencies.
Right. Yeah. Most of the money coming through is federally distributed.
Okay.
So that's the difference. In the other bills, you were playing a much larger role. In this bill, it seems to be at the federal level.
Okay. So I guess a very general statement, because you've been around for decades. Have you ever seen anything as breathtaking as this?
I would have to say that this last year of money coming in, both last year and this year, is unprecedented. And the difference in the last year's money is, I just want to emphasize the timing issue, that last year we were in the middle of the pandemic and we really had it was sort of fighting for our life, and we still got more money than everybody else, except for one state. This year, this is also unprecedented, but my major thought here is the level of aid here is a really amazing opportunity to try to shape Vermont for the future. And it's not about getting it out right away. It's about building where do we want to go? What do we want to do in the long term? And I mean, I think some of the work you've done in this committee around job training, assistance programs, helping the Vermont worker, and dealing with those issues is critical, because we have time to use this money to effectively make Vermont, a larger success in a lot of fronts. And so I think it's less about immediate relief and more about, how do we, what's your vision? Where do you want to go, and where do you want to see us go?
And let's take the workforce development piece. Where do you see that flowing through that we would be able to actually appropriate as we would want? Is that flowing through education? Is that throwing? I haven't seen a workforce development line, and
but I think when it says when it says to respond to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative economic impacts, including assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, or aids to industry, tourism, travel, and hospitality. I think there's a pretty broad. You can interpret that helping households, get jobs, helping unemployed people find jobs, being able to provide free education. A lot of that can fit in that A. And so that to me is when you think about helping the economic sector, there's two sides, and there's the, helping the businesses and helping the people in Vermont that are the workers in those businesses. And
we're clear on that. I guess I'm not clear what line of money that you see being that flexible. I mean, you've just gone through a bunch of things that I don't see where that money would be.
So what I'm saying is, if you look at the 105.24 billion, this huge pot of money, I'm saying within the A, you can probably do a lot of workforce programming. And so I'm saying that this is a door to the big money. This is the door that you can use big money to deal with training of people. And you'll see the House probably allocate maybe 50 million, maybe a fair amount toward workforce training. A lot of it will go through the Vermont State colleges. So it'll help to strengthen that as an institution, but it'll also provide courses. Last year, I think this committee and the House committee put 2.3 million into state colleges, and it was a very successful program. I guess it was oversubscribed in 48 hours. So that type of thing it fits a lot of these categories.
That came out of our committee. That was, so you're saying that it's that 1 plus billion that is more open. I guess I had thought we had just been looking at all the ways it was allocated. But
so that this is the money and you could see the governor coming back and say, I'm giving it all to small businesses or nonprofits. There is language in here that creates opening. So the question to me is taking this language in A and saying, what do you want to do for the long term of the state? And how do we use this? And that's where I think there is room. I mean, I don't want to see this money. I mean, I have no control. This is your job. But I'm just going to tell you, I think the goal is not to think about the next 3 months or 6 months. It's to think about the long-term economy. And I think you have room in this A language to do that.
Can I ask a question in that regard?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Steve, first of all, I'm just so glad that you are still here and in Joint Fiscal Office. I remember talking to you when I was a senior at UVM almost 15 years ago now about some of these things. And I have, a lot of maybe bias in this regard, but it also is founded by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and others that it's very hard for distressed communities to absorb capital without a lot of strategic planning, coordination, and sort of convening on that front. I truly believe that we need some kind of more organized entity to be helping us absorb capital properly and plan for the long term. And I don't know if in your experience, you've seen that come from, you know, a legislative budget office like yours, kind of like the Congressional Budget Office, or a state planning entity. But, you know, I just wonder if we should be having a conversation about what percentage states normally use to actually do the right thing around getting money to the places it needs to go and making sure it helps the people who need it most.
So, I mean, this is a really good question, and let me say, I'm going to answer it two ways. So look in this A, you know, and going back to the, a point we talked about earlier, the technical assistance money that was given to schools and to the municipalities to help plan for the use of their money is basically on this, to respond to public health emergency with respect to COVID-19 or its negative impacts. It's sort of saying, let's stick with the before the comma. And then including assistance to housing, small business, nonprofits, or AIDS, it's sort of an indirect assistance there. And so the question is, we think there's a little bit of risk there, but that was so important to provide local governments and schools with that type of assistance that the legislature took sort of a risk in saying, or the House Senate took the risk in saying, let's provide technical assistance. You're raising the same type of indirect support question, which, and years ago we had, I had the Governor Coonan, and then I think for a little while after that, there was a planning office at the state level which did this type of thinking.
Yep.
It's not a function we have now, and I agree with you. It's a critical function. This bill does not lend itself to that. What it does do is, you know, we've been thinking about that a lot. Like, you know, given this is really a chance to sort of build the future of Vermont, if there's ever a time, and this is something your chair raised about the equity issue, which is a really important, and the equity issue does fit to me in A. You know, because you're assistant to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and impact industry, you could probably fit in that sort of more of an investment in the concern about equity and resources, things like that. But that, because it's not indirect, it's pretty direct. And but you're totally right about the indirect need is there. And how do we do that? I'm trying. This is another area where if I were going to Washington, or if I were encouraging you, or we'll do it too, to say to the Washington people, you need to give us capacity to think through how do we use this. The problem here is that we are a little bit unique among states. Like most states, the amount of money we're giving them, this sounds like a lot of money to us, but if you're New York or California, they're getting probably about, on a per capita basis, maybe 20% of what we're getting. And so they don't feel that need to, they don't have the capacity to use this money to build the future to the same extent that we do. So there's not a completely receptive Washington to the idea of let's make sure Vermont can use all this money wisely. They, you know, you might trigger the response of let's make sure Vermont gives back half of it because they don't need it. So it's not I think it's a great thing to do. I think the question is how much you put into that. It's not really a legislative responsibility in the sense of normally the executive branch would do that, but it's, you know, sometimes making policy is filling voids. And I think you could make getting myself in trouble with the executive branch. There is sort of a void here in thinking like you're raising.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Allison, I think that's a conversation for us in GovOps, but I definitely buy it.
Oh, I agree. So,
You know, we've talked about, could the Senate really put in motion, even in the short term, in the next year, is saying we're getting a lot of federal money. We want to figure out how to use it. Do we set aside some chunk of this money to set up some sort of process to think big picture?
yeah.
And it's not directly in the language, but it could be close enough. You just put a lot of words in there, like, you know, it's important to respond to negative impacts, including the households, small businesses. We need to think through that process. We're going to dedicate X hundreds of thousands of dollars to, or tens of thousands of dollars to set up some type of blue ribbon process to figure out how to best achieve those goals. And, you know, there's ways to create language that would give you quite a bit of cover in using the money in that way.
Yeah. No, I think your charge is one we all are taking to heart, which is it is our opportunity to shape, in large measure, to shape the future of Vermont. And we just need to use it as fully and in ways that will make permanent change and solve some of the perennial challenges that have just gotten, undermined some of the, of that. So it's exciting, but it's also still a little nebulous. And until we get some of that guidance, but we can also shape the guidance, as you say. And I think one of the things, once we have clarity, a little bit more clarity, and we're able to direct a letter to our federal delegation, we need to very specifically ask for the flexibility we want within the arenas we know we're going to need it, like housing or, whatever.
That's it. I'm sort of done. So if anything else you want to have questions, otherwise we can just, move on to life and other exciting things.
Well, to shaping the future of Vermont.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve, very much. We'll be seeing plenty more of you on things dealing with economic recovery and housing for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a good start. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank you. I will we'll leave the meeting if I can figure out how to do it. I
Okay.
know what to do. I just get rid of this.
So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Why don't we come back at 10? As you've seen, Senator Brock has an amendment he's considering offering to S10 that we would have to take a position on. And we'll pick that up and additional conversation at 10 o'clock. Is that good?
It is what it is.
Okay.
And